The Minnesota Wild don't get any breaks to start off the month of October. We will take a look at the October schedule game by game, as well as predicting who we think will be the Locked On Wild Player of the Month on today's episode of Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, this is Brandon Duham, and this is Locked On Wild.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms, especially with the opener on Thursday, so you don't miss out on any pregame, full episodes, and post-game content that we'll be bringing to you all throughout the course of the rest of the season. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, Zach Zeman joins us as we go through the October schedule. We'll look at some of the notable games and how we think the Wild will do in the 9 games in the month of October. We'll also try to figure out who's going to end up being the player of the month, the Locked On player of the month of October, and see how we did once we flip the calendar to November. My name is Seth Topol, your daily Minnesota Wild insider. As mentioned, triumphant return to the show for Zach Zeman, who is as excited as I am to get the season started. And Zach, it is hard to believe that the Florida Panthers are coming to town on Thursday, and that game is for real, and the schedule is all set to start.
Yeah, hockey's back, baby. I'm pumped. I mean, just watching the games tonight gets me so excited. Seeing Chicago win is not a fun sight, but we're back, and that's the biggest part about it. Now we see Florida come in to Minnesota. I mean, this is a team who lost the Stanley Cup. This is a team with vengeance coming right back into this year against the Minnesota Wild without Jared Spurgeon. So it's going to be a fight. It's a huge home advantage for Minnesota. I think that Florida's got something to prove, but the Wild also have something to prove, and I think that it's definitely going to be a banger of a game. And I can't think of a harder first 2 games of the season. I mean, you see Florida here on Thursday, and then you're in Toronto on Saturday. So then it's going to start to, this is when we go, and it's just going to be, right off the shoot. You got 2 hard games, and then the next week gets a little iffy. But I think Florida, it's a tough challenge, and it's a winnable game, especially if you're at home, and I'm excited to watch it.
Yeah, and what I will say about the Florida game before we give our predictions as to how we think it will go, the fact that the Wild have last change allows them to match up more with the guy that really worries me, Matthew Tkachuk, and giving the opportunity to put, whether it be Joel Eriksson or Marcus Foligno on that line to keep Matthew Tkachuk in check. I'm so mad at myself that I got amped up to do that for this episode, but here we are. And so last change, I think, is going to be big in that matchup against the Panthers. And yes, Jared Spurgeon is out. I've talked about this, Zach, is over the last few days as we were kind of getting up to speed with Spurgeon's injury. The teams that worry me in Spurgeon's absence are the ones that have the elite level speed. Florida is more of a kind of grind it out. They do have some speed, but they're more of a grinded out type team like the Minnesota Wild are. So I think of those 2 games, I'm infinitely more worried about Toronto because yikes, that lineup is something else. And so before we move on from these 2 games, I'm officially predicting that the Wild win on Thursday. I think they lose on Saturday. And so first week of the season, first 2 games, I am predicting 1-1. What say you on those 2?
I'm a big fan of that 1-on-1 or 1-and-1. I think that if the Florida game doesn't really go the way the Wild would like, I'm happy these lines get tested early. It's not like you're opening against Columbus and Chicago and stuff like that,
Right.
where it's just like push over weird games. I think that it's essential that these lines are going to get tested. I mean, Jared Spurgeon off on defense gives these defenders like a game to make a name for themselves, several games rather. And I think it's going to be essential for a lot of people. Like let's go make a name for ourselves. And if it doesn't go right against Florida at home, then make those changes if you really want to against Toronto, or keep it the same and have 2 trial and error games where, all right, well, these are 2 contenders. If it doesn't go, if you go 0-2, it's totally fine. I mean, like that's expected. Your captain's out. One of your best defenders is out. But a 1-1 is perfect. And I think it's very doable. But obviously, if it goes 0-2, I wouldn't be so surprised.
If it goes 0-2, I don't think we'll see what happened last year where you have just like all 4 wheels of the car come off and you're through 3 games and you're like, holy cow, this is bad. I don't think we'll see that this year, but even if they do get to 0-2, I feel confident in saying that they will not get to 0-3 because, Zach, the next 3 games for the Wilds at Montreal, then home against the Los Angeles Kings, and on Saturday the 21st, home against the Columbus Blue Jackets. So let's talk about this stretch. Montreal, obviously, still trying to work their way back up. Still trying to build around Johnny Gaudreau. They had a high pick in the draft this past season. Columbus, I'm talking about Columbus now. I think I said Montreal, but even with Montreal, they're young. They're trying to kind of get back to relevance themselves. And so it's a nice little sandwich around a juggernaut that is the Los Angeles Kings, a team that has a ton of offense, a ton of center depth. Questionable goalie play, though. So that is going to be a fascinating set of 3 games because you feel like you have 2 really winnable ones with that tough challenge in the middle against the Kings.
I think that Kings game's the game of the month, if I'm being honest. It gives, it's your 4th game. By then you're back in motion. Like this isn't new to anyone. Rossi gets his first couple games. Faber's back. Like I think you get a couple games of like trial and error. And I think I'm a fan of Los Angeles. They're like a dark horse, like center driven like team. I think they're very entertaining. They're like, I don't even want to compare this to the NFL, but I feel like they can make a name for themselves like the 49ers could. Who knows? Maybe the Kings can make a name for themselves like that. Maybe they got a little Brock Purdy action in there. But no, I don't know. I'm a big fan of Los Angeles. I think they got young stars. Kevin Fiala, obviously. That team is on fire. Canadiens is a win. I see Columbus has a win, especially at home. And Montreal's going to be a little different. You get a couple days off before you go battle Montreal. So, I mean, hey, take those while you get them. But yeah, I think that Los Angeles game is very entertaining. And that's going to be a huge, like, okay, this is our identity this year moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
If you lose to Los Angeles, okay, well, at home again. But hey, I mean, I don't know. I hope not. But Los Angeles is that game.
Here's a spicy take. More to come in episode 2. Here's a spicy take for that Kings game. OT win.
Yeah.
For the Wild. I think they get to OT and they beat the Kings.
So, like, as a Mizzou student, like going into that LSU football game, it's like we know this is going to be a shootout, like regardless, like win or loss. I think that's always what it is when Los Angeles comes to town. I think these 2 teams are similar. They're both gritty. Pat Maroon now on this lineup, so let's not forget about him. Marcus Foligno's back. I mean, why not? It's going to be a battle for sure. And I definitely think a nice little overtime, like 6-6 overtime. No, it could be insane. It depends if our goaltending blows up at the beginning like it did last year. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but it's a possibility. So it's like, you never know what's going to happen. We got to talk about like goaltending too. Fleury's going to start one of these games, probably against Montreal. He might look good, and who knows if he'll get the nod against Los Angeles. You never know. And I think if Gustafsson does play well, that Los Angeles game is Gustafsson. So we'll see.
I really would like to see over the first 5 games, Fleury get the Montreal game and then the Columbus game. And because that means that you can get Gus against Los Angeles, Gus against Florida, Gus against Edmonton, and Gus against Toronto as well. I think that's just the best way to match up. I know that probably isn't how things are going to play out, but I do like, the more I've thought about it, the angle of having Fleury play in Montreal to kind of give him an opportunity to potentially tip the cap one final time against the Canadiens. But we'll see how things play out. So in that stretch, you had said 2-1 in those next 3 games. I'm going with 3-0.
Hey,
In that stretch between the Kings, Columbus, or between Montreal, the Kings, and Columbus. Let's take a quick pause and we'll talk about the final 4 games of the month before we start to figure out who we think will be the players of the month for Locked On Wild. That is all on the way as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. The NFL season is underway. The NHL season will be here before you know it. And the Minnesota Wild hoping that they have the season we've all been hoping for. Everybody here is a huge fan of the NHL. And that's why I am so excited about the Sleeper app. The Sleeper app is the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. And it is my go-to for daily fantasy sports, especially in the realm of daily fantasy hockey. With Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash on daily fantasy. Anybody that follows the Minnesota Wild knows that Kirill Kaprizov always puts on a show on opening night. So if you are looking to fill someone in your lineup on Thursday, Kirill Kaprizov better be one of those guys. And I would also throw Matthew Tkachuk in, Philip Gustafsson or Sergei Bobrovsky, both good choices at goalie. There are endless possibilities to fill your lineup with the Sleeper app. Make sure you use promo code LOCKEDONNHL, and you'll also get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's Locked On NHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. A lot of things have changed over the past few months, which leads to a lot of uncertainty. And when disaster could potentially strike, there's no worse feeling than not being provided for with life-saving medication. Jace Medical is here to help you through that with their Jace case. Jace Medical makes things simple. You go online, fill out a form, and then you get a prescription with life-saving medications right to your door. The Jace case gives you peace of mind so that you are not just hoping that you have access to medication in an emergency. Jace Medical makes sure you have the medication in hand. Get $20 off on these life-saving antibiotics today from Jace Medical by using code LOCKEDON at checkout at jacemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, we will also be taking a look at some big predictions for the season, some hot takes. Got the salsa right here, the hot sauce right here. And we'll see how spicy we can make things for our bonus episode coming at you later today. But continuing with Zach Zeman today, talking about the October schedule. Zach, we got 4 more games on the schedule. As of right now, I have the Minnesota Wilds at 4-1. You have the Minnesota Wilds at 3-2. Next slate includes, on October 24th, the Edmonton Oilers, followed by a road trip, which is at Philadelphia, at Washington. That is a back-to-back. And at the New Jersey Devils. What do you think about that 4-game stretch? We see a ton of East Coast road games early on this season.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Fleury will start that Columbus game, and then you get 2 days off before you host Edmonton at home. So I think that if like everyone will be rested, Gustafsson starts against Edmonton, I think we can really give him a run for money. I'm so sick. Like, I'm not sick of it, but I think it's insane that everyone's just so high on Edmonton this year, but they always have problems. And I think that they're like, every team has problems, obviously, but I don't know. Edmonton kind of scares me a little bit. Like I almost had them winning the cup in my last year's bracket. I actually took Vegas. I don't even know how. But anyway, Edmonton's just that weird team to me. They're always, always, always highly touted about, and I think that the Wild can give them a run for their money. But then after that game, you go to the East Coast, and here you see the Flyers and Capitals, who aren't like necessarily juggernauts. And so the back-to-back here is definitely a goalie matchup. I mean, obviously, I don't think you're going to give Gus both of those, or even after if he plays against Edmonton there. So I don't know. You see the first back-to-back of the year. It's going to be interesting. I think that there's a lot this team can do with a night's rest. It's going to be interesting. I mean, you got the East Coast, and then those are two winnable games, though. And I do think both those teams are struggling. A lot of weird stuff going down in Philly, but I'm kind of there for it. I don't know why I like them like that, but good for them. I think the Wild can capitalize on both of those games. Those are must wins, I will say. And then you get a day off on Saturday, and then you go to New Jersey. Now, this is a team that's like, this is like, if this is the spiciest team, no pun intended on the next episode here. They're legit. I think New Jersey is legit. That's a very, very hard matchup, especially still being on that road trip, even with the game or even with a day of rest. I think New Jersey it's going to be interesting. It's one of those like Sunday 4 p.m. games where it's like, you never know what afternoon hockey team you're going to see. Those games are always tricky. It's not at night. It's not like prime time stuff. It's going to be interesting. I think the Wild can find a little struggle there. If they win those games against Philly and Washington, I think this is a droppable game. Not that I would like to see that, but if they do win those two prior games on the East Coast, then this New Jersey one, I'd be okay with the loss.
I think I'm going to go 2-2 for this stretch. Edmonton is a team that the Wild have had success against in the past, mainly because that is like the get-up game for Jonas Brodin, because he gets an opportunity to go shadow Connor McDavid and just make life miserable for him. He does it regularly.
Yeah.
And so I would be pretty confident if Jared Spurgeon were playing. This is where the Spurgeon timetable kind of starts to come into play. I just think McDavid and Draisaitl is a lot to try to contend with. And so I'm picking an L in that game. I think they'll bounce back and beat Philly, because if Nick Delorier decides that he wants to fight, Pat Maroon is more than willing to accept that challenge. And, the last time these two teams played, I think like 4 players fought.
Yeah. Is it okay to say that we can expect a Wild game on that Thursday night, but also a fight night that Thursday night?
Yeah.
I
think anytime Philly's involved, I think you can just expect that there's going to be a fight night.
Yeah, Delorier, former Minnesota Wild. Pat Maroon, brand new member of the Minnesota Wild. Let's go at it. I'm all there for it. I'm a big fight fan, so let's go.
I think the Wild will win the back-to-back. Back-to-backs are always tricky, but I think with Philly and then with Washington is in a weird spot where it's basically like they're just trying to continue to push Alex Ovechkin towards the just crazy amount of goals that he has scored throughout his career. But I think they're beatable. And so I'm going to say loss to Edmonton, win versus Philly and Washington, and then a loss to the Devils. And it sounds like you are on the exact same path.
I'm like on the same path, but I do think that Edmonton is a winnable game. I hope Spurgeon comes back there, and I think you hit the head on the nail. It's like Brodin is that guy against McDavid. We've seen this the last couple of years, and I think if he keeps that up, that's a winnable game. You get two off days before that home game. I don't know. I think 2-2 is not bad, but I'm gonna say 3-1. Why not?
I like it, because then that means that we both end with identical predictions, which we will talk about here in a second. We're also going to announce the potential candidates for Locked On Wild Player of the Month as we finish today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by BetterHealth. If you've benefited from therapy throughout the course of your life, as someone who has been to therapy myself. I can't endorse it enough. It is so good to get yourself in a great spot mentally. And honestly, I had to talk myself into it a little bit at first, but once I did, it was smooth sailing from there. It's helpful learning positive coping skills, how to set boundaries. Plus, it also empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It isn't just for those who've experienced major trauma and more. Make your brain your friend with BetterHelp. And if you visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today, you can get $10 off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedonnHL. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Again, make sure you subscribe on YouTube, your favorite podcast platforms, Instagram, TikTok, X, Facebook, you name it, because we've got content coming for you all platforms, not only throughout the week, during games as well. We'll be bringing you intermission reports, both on the road and at home. So make sure that you stick with Locked On Wild for all of that. And big announcements coming later tonight. The first Locked On live stream of the season. I'm going to be sharing some thoughts, listening to listener questions, answering listener questions. We'll hang out at 7 o'clock, probably for about an hour, just to kind of chill and get ready for the start of the regular season. So make sure that you are tuned into the Locked On Wild YouTube channel at 7 o'clock tonight to get a chance to hang out and share your thoughts on what you think will happen this season. So both Zach and I predicting 6-3 starts in the 9 games. That would be fantastic, I think. Especially considering what this team did last year. I think this team is going to be very eager to not repeat that type of a mess. And so I think we'll see a much better, much cleaner start for this team, trying to get out of the gate on a high note, which I think is going to put everybody at ease because we both remember it pretty vividly, I'm sure. 0-3 start, 20 goals allowed. There were major panic buttons being hit. Yeah. All those, in case of emergency, break glass. All of those buttons had been punched. And I think everybody was going down the fire escape. They were throwing the lifeboats out into the water. There was major panic last year in that 0-3 start. And so I think this team is going to learn from that and be very eager to not repeat those mistakes this season.
Yeah, what's really interesting to me is, the Wild are a team that wants to get back. They have something to prove. But there are a lot of teams in this month that also are on the same exact boat. And so there's going to be a lot of clashes. A lot of stuff is going to go down. A lot of questions are going to be answered, but a lot of new questions are going to be prompted. And so I'm excited to see how it goes. I'm very, very excited that hockey's back in general. And I think the Wild have a very, very challenging month. But also, I'd rather have this right away than later in the year.
Yeah. And it's just getting started because I don't want to tip our hands too much, but I just want to reiterate this stretch because I think it is both equal parts ridiculous and equal parts, if they can come out of this relatively unscathed, that is going to set them up, I think, for the rest of the season. Yeah. And that is, of course, the stretch that starts. I mean, we can even go to October 26th at Philly, at Washington, at New Jersey, home against New Jersey, home against the New York Rangers, at the New York Islanders, at the New York Rangers, at Buffalo. If the Wild come out of that stretch against some very tough Eastern Conference teams with, I'm sure, a few bruises, few bumps, if they come out of that stretch playing relatively well, that's a springboard. That's a springboard trip for this team.
Talk about a difference from last year. Like that, there was a meltdown last year in this month, and if you solve that, if you get a good head start like you didn't have last year, I think it's huge. It's a huge step forward.
Zach, before we go to who we think will be Locked On Wild Player of the Month for October, I do want to get your thoughts because obviously we reacted yesterday to the news that Kirill Kaprizov gets the alternate captain A. What did you think of that decision by the Wild to go with Kaprizov? Obviously, it sounded like something that was universally supported by the locker room. Those guys love Kirill. He's very well respected. And so it seems like a fantastic fit. And I think, maybe not somebody who we thought was going to get it, but I think it makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, when Dumba leaves, this debate has been a thing for a lot of the offseason. What I was thinking, I was more like on the X side, and then because I'm like, well, X been here longer, he's like drafted or before Kirill, but then I'm thinking Kirill has broken records like this. Like you can almost not give Kirill the A here. Like I don't know. I was thinking about it, and I was like, is it a good move? Is it a good move? I'm sure like X fine with it. X is like, to me, a quiet man, like very like reserves, like and very like in his own zone. And I think Kirill is like flashy, like here I am, I'm gonna make a name for myself. Like let's go. He's got the fire under him, and Ek is there to take all the, like I don't know. He's got like that straight face. He doesn't say a lot, but everyone hates him kind of guy. But Kirill's like, hey, I'm that guy. Like let me take like the bull by the horns here. I'll go get that goal if you need it. I'll go make those plays. And I think that it just sets the tone for the locker room moving forward. That like if you want like to be up here in the rankings with these guys, if you want to be a leader in this locker room, you're gonna have to make a name for yourself. And not that I'm not saying X not, but I'm saying
right.
Like there's definitely like a mood in this locker room. It's like we need to like go out there every night with like a fire and like a flash. And I think that giving Kirill that A is like gives the younger guys like Rossi and Faber like, hey, I can be that one day. I just need to play hard. I mean, we see Kirill's determination off the ice. He's learning English now. He's been here a couple years. I mean, one of the highest paid guys on this team. Not that matters, but I'm like, it obviously speaks for itself. And I think that if you want Kirill on this team for a while, you're going to make him a leader. And I think it just like slowly ties into when we're going to need to resign him in the future. And I think that it was a great move. I don't know why I was on the Ek train for a little bit. I just thought Ek, like, just the longevity, like he's the 10-year, he's been here, blah, blah. That's why I was thinking about it. But now I'm like, yeah, Kirill's that guy. You can't not give him the A. I mean, like now that I'm thinking about it today, it's a great choice. I'm a big fan of it. The mood in the locker room is fiery. This team's got something to prove. Pat Maroon's coming in. Let's go.
Big vibes. Yeah. The only guy I think that works as hard as Joel Eriksson Ek does in game preparation and just off-season preparation is Kirill. So that's something that the team can look up to as well as we get things rolling. Zach, let's finish with the predictions for Locked On Wild Player of the Month. I think we're going to see the Kirill Kaprizov revenge tour after getting injured last year. I don't know what to put for a number for goals, but I think he will get, how's this, double-digit goals in the month of October. I think he starts with an absolute fury. And so Kirill Kaprizov is my prediction for Locked On Wild Player of the Month. Who do you think is going to get off to the best start?
How do I not pick the most essential alternate captain this team has ever seen in its franchise's history? I think Kirill is going to come back. He's in a spot to lead this team now. He's got it on his jersey every night. And I think it's dumb to not even think about him being the guy. I think every Wild fan is hoping that he'll start off hot. I think I'm a big fan of the double-digit goals. He's going to have a lot of tough challenges. There's a lot of great teams with great defenses in this month. And I think, it's going to be tough, but I think Kirill is that guy. And if you want to start off a season well, your top performers have to start right away. And I think that if Kirill does, this team's going to find a lot of success. So I'll piggyback and I'll ride with you because here we go. Kirill, Locked On Wild Player of the Month.
I love it. So 6-3 predictions to start the season. Kirill Kaprizov, Locked On Wild Player of the Month. We'll file this away and we'll see what happens once we flip the calendar to November. That will do it for today's episode of Locked On Wild. So once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcast platforms, because if you don't, you're going to miss out on a ton of content coming at you every game all season long. So make sure you are not left in the dust by joining Locked On Wild Nation today. We've got new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.